Good evening. Good evening and welcome everyone. I have to say it was so fun to see like a couple of people arrive by bike this evening. Welcome to summer and welcome to the community library. My name is Jenny Emery Davidson. I'm the executive director of the community library, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone who is here with us in the John A. and Carol O. Moran Lecture Hall, as well as those who may be live streaming from other locations. Welcome to everyone. And I would like to welcome you simply with a short poem to help us settle into the program for the evening. This comes from a collection by Ted Kuzer, Delights and Shadows, part of my always effort to get you to check out some poetry. Look how slender it is. This is a poem by Ted Kuzer called A Box of Pastels. I once held on my knees a simple wooden box in which a rainbow lay dusty and broken. It was a set of pastels that had been years before belonged to the painter Mary Cassatt. And all the colors she'd used in her work lay open before me. Those hues she'd most used, the peaches and pinks, were worn down to stubs, while the cool colors, violet, ultramarine, had been set, scarcely touched, to one side. She'd had little patience with darkness, and her heart held only a measure of shadow. I touched the warm dust of those colors, her tools, and left there with light on the tips of my fingers. I love that poem, and I think it offers an analogy for us with what the music festival does for me and what these programs with Alasdair Neale do, I think, for all of us. It's like he sits us down with that box of pastels and explains those tools, the colors of light and darkness, and opens up the world of these musical pieces to us. So it is such a pleasure to once again help to host an Upbeat with Alasdair, and my pleasure to introduce Alasdair Neale, the music director of the Sun Valley Music Festival, and the violinist and guest curator, Benjamin Beilman.
Thank you, Jenny, for those lovely and generous words, and good evening and welcome everybody to this evening's Upbeat with Alasdair. I'm so delighted to welcome my good friend and colleague Ben Beilman here tonight. Many of you will remember his previous appearance at the festival in the summer of 2018 when he played a beautiful, elegant and eloquent account of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. It's great to have you back, Ben, and I know that in the meantime, the couple of big things have happened for you, that you've got married, and now you have a little 1-year-old whose name is
Mr. Felix.
There you go. Exactly,
Yes,
that's it.
that very one, actually.
Yeah. So we can talk a little bit about that fatherhood a little bit later on, but let's. Do you have any? Let's go back sort of to the beginning, perhaps to start with. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your life, as well as touch a little bit also on this week's programming that Ben has curated. I was thinking, do you have an earliest musical memory?
My earliest musical memory was following my sister around. I have one older sister. She started Suzuki violin through her public school when she was 5. I was 3 at the time, and I distinctly remember sitting on the ground at one of her private lessons, playing with books and trucks and trains and stuff like that as she was, sawing away at Lightly Row and Old MacDonald and all those things. But yeah, that was my first memory. And to be quite honest, I don't really remember a time in my life without music or without an instrument in my hand. So I'm very lucky in that way.
Were your parents musical too?
They are music lovers. They would never call themselves musicians. I think my mom was, she loved singing. She sang a lot in various choirs. My dad supposedly played sousaphone in high school and clarinet. But they adore music, but they are just, lovers of music.
So where did that take you to your first step, from seeing your sister and so forth, and maybe hearing your parents sing or whatever? But when did the violin appear in your life, assuming that was your first instrument?
Yeah, it was my first instrument, although I will say my first official violin was actually a macaroni box with a ruler on it. So that was learning. It's a great thing. In Suzuki Method, they teach you all of the the ways to enter the stage, to get yourself set. That you have they take usually a pizza box, and like the round inside a pizza box, and they draw exactly where your feet should be. So they give you that. They teach you how to pick up the violin. They give you a fake violin in case you drop it and stuff like that. So. But yeah, violin was my first instrument. After 2 years of hearing my sister saw a way, I asked for a violin myself. So I picked up the violin and took lessons when I was 5.
When you were 5. And where was this?
We were living in Houston, Texas at the time. So although I had very brief lessons in Houston before we then moved to Atlanta. And I was really lucky to get into the studio of a wonderful woman named Pat Fastias, who was an Atlanta symphony violinist. And so through her, I kind of got the best, recommendations for recordings and editions and bowings and all these things. She was a Suzuki teacher, but she was also introducing me to, if you want to really understand Mozart, go listen to Arthur Grumio play the sonatas or the violin concertos. Or, this week with the symphony, we have Itzhak Perlman coming. You should go hear him. Or not just Salerno Sonnenberg. So that era of the kind of late 90s, I got the best osmosis training and also direct training.
Now, I presume she wasn't giving you this advice at age 5. I mean, you're probably quite precocious. But
well, she was telling my parents, of course. But I mean, our lessons, I credit my sister a lot. I think having an older sibling who is so devoted, and of course we fought, but so protective of me. I think there was a sense that always we were both doing this together, side by side. So if my sister was more advanced, I was always a step or half a step behind her. She would always kind of give me her fingerings, her bowings, her music, all that stuff. So it was a very quick progression for the both of us.
That's lovely. And how did you take to practicing? Some people at age 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 were a little more reluctant, let's say. But
yes, me as well. I distinctly remember at one of these lessons, my mom was very devoted to both my sister and my musical careers. She would come to our lessons and she would take notes. She didn't know anything about violin, but she would take notes on, in this position, you put your finger this way, and, for this music, you do this thing with your bow. Very instructive notes to remember everything we had learned in the lesson. Of course, I was not always the one to read the notes and things like that. And I remember she would ask me sometimes, she said, have you read the notes that I took for this? And I said, yes, of course. I remember everything. And she said, are you sure you read the notes? I was like, yeah, of course. She asked me a couple days later, same thing. I read it, I promise. She showed me about a week later that she had written in the notes, Ben, if you show me this note, I will give you $5. The first time she crossed that out, and then it was $10. And then it was 50. And then basically she said, I'm so sorry, but you missed out on a great investment here.
Busted. Oh, that's adorable. So this was all the while you were in Atlanta.
Yep.
So you're obviously now you're 5, you're 7, you're 9, you're 11. You're building all of these foundations for what will become your career. Walk us through the sort of the next phase, if you could, in your life. And was there a point for was there an aha moment when you realized this is going to be my life, or was it just a gradual progression?
I don't know if it was ignorance, stupidity, pigheadishness, or whatever it was, but I realized that at the age of 10, I really did love the violin. I could perceive that I was good at it. People responded very positively to what I was doing. And I made this judgment then that I said, if I invest my childhood into this thing, I think I will probably have a very good adulthood. So I remember, as with most kids that age, it was, you're doing multiple activities. There's soccer, there's, other camps, there's after school activities. For me, soccer and violin were the big things. And it was sort of, if I become a professional soccer player, my career will probably be over about 32 years old. Whereas violin, I see these 80-year-olds and these 85-year-olds. And, that seems like a much more interesting lifetime for me. So I made that decision when I was 10. And fortunately, that coincided. I think our parents were really conscious that my sister and I were progressing and had something different to offer with music. And so we ended up moving from Atlanta to Chicago, partially for my dad's job, but mostly because we were seeking out these legendary pre-college violin teachers. They're named Almeida and Roland Vamos, and they teach in Chicago. They've been mostly in the Midwest. But if you go through the list of every major orchestra, many soloists, they probably at some point have touched the Vamos institution. They're a kind of team teaching husband and wife couple, and they have a great system where everything is put together.
Yes, you're right. Those are behind the scenes names, but if you know,
Yes.
that the list is long and impressive of people that have come into their orbit. So now you're in Chicago. You're a teenager. Are you playing chamber music? Are you playing orchestra? Are you concentrating just on solo repertoire?
All the above. Luckily, chamber music was always a very core teaching part for me. I think I played in my first piano trio when I was about 11, maybe 12. I remember I also played an early Beethoven string quartet, and I remember just feeling amazed by it, but totally oblivious to what was happening simultaneously. It's for professional musicians, it's easy to play your part with great feeling, but also hear everybody else's part, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 other parts. For a 11-year-old kid, you're sort of like, why are you playing at the same time? Like, what's going on here? But chamber music was really my way into studying a score and understanding that, yes, I'm an important part, but I'm one of many important parts to this thing. So chamber music was big. I played in some string orchestra with the Mr. Vamos would conduct these string orchestra things. Sometimes you'd play bigger chamber music pieces, a Beethoven string quartet or Schoenberg for Nacht or some other smaller pieces. But yeah, that kind of total education, I think, was part of the secret sauce that made the Vamos system so successful.
Did you like high school?
I did. I remember feeling I had a great group of friends in high school. I went to a normal traditional high school. I played in my public school orchestra, took normal classes and stuff. But I remember thinking that as much as I enjoy spending time with these people, what I'm going to do is very different. I can't connect with them on the same deep level that I have been able to with other, young 15, 16-year-old kids who have this kind of alter life on the weekends where it's just only music, or after school, it's only music. So I knew I was so eager to get off to music school. I begged my mom to let me apply for some of these conservatories that would accept 15, 16, and 17-year-old students. And very wisely, she said, finish your proper education first, and then you can devote all your life to music. So I finished high school 1 year early. I applied for the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, and fortunately on that first try, I was accepted. So I completed my high school diploma and then started my fresh life as a musician.
We'll come back to the full circle aspect of what you just referred to with Curtis in a bit. But first of all, as your experience as an undergraduate, I'm sure you all know Curtis is one of the great music conservatories in the world. Was it intimidating? Because I've been in that place a couple of times as a grown up, and you kind of feel the presence going into that place. There's a lot of ghosts there, and it's in its very sort of patrician way. It's still quite intimidating. Did you have that reaction, or did you just sort of walk in there and go, "Yeah, this is home"?
I had been idolizing Curtis. When I first learned of this place and its existence, I was about 13. I was at a summer festival called the Encore School for Strings outside of Cleveland. It was 6 weeks of basically just practice jail. And for the first time, I was exposed to these unbelievable hotshot violinists who were not too many years older than me. And I was sort of like, where did these people come from? Are they coming from abroad? Are they from someplace else? Who do they study with? How do I get into that? And without fail, almost all of them studied in some way at Curtis. And so I remember I went on the website. This is when, instead of being able to have stuff on your tablet or whatever, you'd have to print out the whole thing. And I printed out the academic handbook, the course book, basically, of all the classes you could take at Curtis. Ear training, music theory, all these extremely boring, pedantic classes. But I remember looking, very important, but they can be very pedantic.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I remember just sitting in my bed, like reading it as if this were like Harry Potter. You know, it was like, oh, this is a different world that exists out there that I think I can feel at home in. So I think that obsession with the place steeled me against this feeling of inadequacy, which, you know, of course, Curtis is a very elite school, and everybody who goes there is a big fish in their local pond. And then when you get to Curtis, you realize you might be a very small fish, you might be a medium fish, but you are certainly no longer the big fish. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it seems like a very healthy attitude there. So at this stage, did you... well, actually, let me backtrack. At what stage did you focus your real intent on being a soloist?
I think for violinists, usually what happens is the way that you progress technically and interpretively is you're given the concerto parts to the solo part to most concertos. You don't really get a ton of exposure to really interpreting a Mahler symphony or a Mozart symphony or other things until you have kind of these technical basics. So I remember, you know, going through the big major concertos even in my high school days, and then of course at conservatory, the most efficient way to teach and to learn is to often just kind of dissect these big things. You can really study the big concepts through these concertos. And fortunately for me, I was able to go, you know, more deeply into them, and I put myself out there in competitions, and so I've sort of never left that learning of a solo part of a concerto. I've of course added other things, but that was kind of all I've known so far.
And who was your principal teacher at Curtis?
My main teacher for 4 out of the 5 years that I was there was the great Ida Kavafian, who was a violinist in the Beaux-Arts trio. She played in Tashi, a chamber music group, so she really reinforced that chamber music idea. And then at the very end of my Curtis education, I also started studying with Pamela Frank, who, of course, had a wonderful solo career of her own that was sadly cut short by a hand injury. But I kind of was able to, through her, learn not just great interpretations of the great masterworks, but also the elements of how to conduct yourself as a young person standing before an orchestra of seasoned veterans that allows you to still say something that is uniquely you without putting your foot in your mouth, essentially.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I mean, it's great to be taught, here's what your bow speed should be, and here's how I think you should do this shift. Yeah. But that's amazing advice. And from Ida Kavafian, was it primarily technical, musical, a combination? What kind of things made her stand out as a teacher?
She teaches everything, and she's a great teacher. If I had to distill it down, I think her greatest asset is pragmatism. I think, of course, all lessons and all music starts from, let's go from the core message of what the composer's writing. Let's really study every marking we have here, but also let's consider you're going to be playing this with this kind of orchestra or this kind of conductor or in this kind of space. That tempo is not going to work. No one's going to hear you if you play like that. I understand the quality of sound that you're going for, but in the real world, you must do it this way. She also, similar to the Vamoses, she had quite a stable of young violinists at that time. So there was a kind of a healthy encouragement of gentle competition between her students, which some people I think didn't enjoy quite as much. I found it to be very constructive. I think this idea of let's edge each other on without cutting each other down, of course, but let's make sure that we are always at the top.
Yeah, it's a fine line, but that's good to encourage that kind of healthy competition. Any other experiences that stick out at your time at Curtis? Any special memories? It's quite a place.
Well, we share a teacher.
Oh, yes, we do.
The other kind of big titan that taught at Curtis at the time was the conductor Otto Werner Müller. Otto Werner Müller is known to many orchestral players as kind of the I don't know how else to say this, the Führer, essentially.
I think of perhaps, let's go with Titanic Teuton.
Okay. He was a incredible musician, a wonderful mind, but scary as all get out. I mean, he played trumpet in Richard Strauss's orchestra in Germany. He
studied orchestration with Richard Strauss.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, one-on-one. He was elite during the early 40s, I suppose.
He was a relic of a distant time that for many of us was untouchable. But he taught us everything we needed to know in the Curtis Orchestra about how to listen across different sections. I remember in the first 3 weeks of school, he would always have a kind of boot camp for how to play an orchestra. And we would, do a Brahms symphony. Sometimes it was the first symphony. We'd do a Strauss tone poem, kind of the big titans of music. And he would have, the oboe play a certain line, and then he'd have the violins play something, 600 bars later or something. So he really taught you how to think about music interpretively across an entire symphonic color range.
Yes, absolutely. That's interesting. You talk about range, because one of the things I think that he grasped so incredibly well, and that he was able to transmit not just to his conducting students but also to orchestra members, was the concept of musical architecture, and to think that large-scale musical forms consist of chapters within which there are sub-chapters, within which there are pages, within which there are paragraphs, and within which there are sentences, and so forth, and to break down things into small forms and then understand the direction that the whole piece takes. And that's just as good. Not just conductors that need to know that. It's just however we're making music. Well, that sounds like a great experience. So now you're 21, 22 or so, and what's the next step after that?
In my final year at Curtis, I started putting myself out there in competitions. Competitions are, as Bartok likes to say, competitions are only good for racehorses. But I found it useful because it was the first time that I had to really prepare 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours of music simultaneously, all at an incredibly high level. So I was fortunate. I did sort of one that I thought would be a kind of warm-up competition, which was the Montreal competition. I think probably because I was so carefree, I ended up getting first prize from that. A manager in Switzerland kind of heard of all these things, and I developed a small management affiliation in Switzerland, and I started to think, I'm not done learning. I know there are certain artistic things that I don't know that I don't have, but I can feel that I need something extra. So that competition gave me some acclaim. I did an audition for a different manager in the United States called Young Concert Artists that also helped to book smaller concerts in New York, but I knew that I wanted to study in Europe. So I auditioned for Christian Tetzlaff's sort of small class at the Kronberg Academy. Christian Tetzlaff is one of the great, not even violinist. I mean, he happens to play the violin, but he's a thinker. He's a color interpreter. He's a philosopher in many ways. He's crazy, but he's an incredible inspiration. And I sought him out as a teacher, and he took me under his wing. And similar to what Pam offered me, he offered me in a much more concrete education, where, of course, I would have lessons with him sometimes in Frankfurt, where the school was located, but more often than not, I would travel with him to St. Louis, and I'd see him play Sibelius Concerto. I'd see him rehearse with the conductor for the first time. I'd see the first rehearsal with the orchestra. I'd see the second rehearsal. I'd see the concert. I'd talk to him after the concert. I saw him in Munich. I saw him in Berlin. I saw him in London. So I really was essentially an apprentice to what I was hoping to do, and I saw how he conducted himself. I got to ask him, hey, this thing changed or this thing didn't change. How do you deal with that? I also, I talked to him about the big questions. At the time, he was a personal inspiration because he's a great violinist, but also he plays chamber music in a string quartet with his sister, who is a wonderful cellist. He's a very dedicated family man. There are stories of him, after the concert, literally after stepping off stage from the encore, going straight into a car, catching a red eye to go back home so that he can take his kids to school the next day. So I wanted to get to know more about how do you become that person? How do you insist on these morals and ideals while also being, top of the top of the top?
That makes me so happy to hear, because the world of an international concert soloist is glamorous in one way, but it's also filled with potential traps. And it sounds like these influences that have come to bear on you have just been the most healthy ways of guarding yourself from falling into some of those traps, which are all too easy because they're not taught.
Right. Yeah. I mean, with Christian specifically, he's still an inspiration, but in getting to know him, I also realized that certain ideals and reputations about him were incorrect. And so it was both helpful to know that that's the goal, but also to see that everyone falters, and how do you deal with when you falter. I don't need to go into specifics about his life, but to realize that yes, we are human. This is a long journey. We will make mistakes, and how do you go around, or how do you pick yourself up from those errors that might be you can't fix certain ones.
Yep, sure. So at this point, you've now come essentially had your time at Kronberg, and now there's a blank canvas before you. How did you start filling that?
Well, fortunately, I was sort of given a calendar by my management, and they said, "You're going here, you're going here, you're going here," and yeah, I had. I am currently still in a very lucky position, and at that time, I was very lucky that I had more offers than I could take. So then the question came: how do I prioritize? What do I do? What's most important to me? So luckily, I had many great opportunities to work with great orchestras. I played with my hometown orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, several times in Philadelphia, at Carnegie, at the Vale Festival. I got to go over to Europe and play quite a few great concerts. And that's a very lucky and extraordinary position to be in. But after 7, 8, 9 years of doing these kinds of concerts, you start to ask yourself sort of now what? I've played Beethoven Concerto, whatever, 30 times, and it will only get better, and I will never tire of this piece. But what else can I do? What new experiences are still out there for me? Which actually brings me to this kind of festival, this whole curation thing. I had the opportunity to serve as a kind of artistic advisor for a festival in Santa Barbara that was very short-lived, but that gave me the kind of the appetite for, I want to program things that are not just for myself in violin and piano, but how do we say a bigger message across programming? How do we choose pieces that we love listening to, but also hopefully has a deeper thread that can say something underneath it?
Yeah, well, that's great. What was I going to say? So you mentioned a little. Maybe this is the time to do this. You mentioned starting out on the macaroni box with what? With some wires
taped to it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So perhaps you could introduce us to your upgraded macaroni box sitting there next to you. He traded up.
This is a used violin.
How many miles does it have on it?
Quite a few. This is a nearly 300-year-old instrument. This was made in 1740. This is an instrument made in Cremona by the great violin maker Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù. Del Gesù is just a kind of moniker that's added because his personal stamp inside there has IHS, in hominum spiritum, in it. But what's most notable about it is the list of players who have used this violin. So this is I think they call it the sobriquet. The name for this violin is the Isai Guarneri del Gesù. So Eugène Isai, for those of you who don't know, was one of the great violinists of all time. He was, I forget if he was named the king of the violin or the czar of the violin. He was a great giant of a man. He had slick black hair. He was, I think, 6'3", just wide as can be. He was a composer, a conductor, a virtuoso. He was also the personal violin instructor to the Queen of Belgium. And he became very close friends with her and became in many ways a kind of diplomat for the whole Kingdom of Belgium. So much so that when he passed away, he was given a state funeral service. His casket, was laid for visitation, and above the casket, this violin was displayed on a red velvet pillow. So then after him, it went to a few different dealers. I believe in the United States, I believe Yehudi Menuhin had a brief stint on the violin. After Menuhin, it went to the conductor Charles Monk, his personal collection. It went to some more dealers, and then it went to Isaac Stern, who chose this violin as kind of his main concert violin for about 35, 40 years. I think he picked it up in 1960 or 65, something like that. Near his retirement, he made an arrangement with a foundation in Japan so that he could continue playing the violin until he was done, but he sold it to the Nippon Foundation, and the Nippon Foundation, which has been renamed to the Sasakawa Foundation, loaned it to Pinchas Zuckerman briefly. Before me, there was Sergei Khachatryan, the great sort of Armenian-German virtuoso, and now I've had this violin for 4 years.
Yeah, that's worth a little round of applause, I think. Did you have to pinch yourself at any point when you were getting this thing? I can't believe I'm playing this instrument.
Yes. Yeah. There's a brief backstory. So the Nippon Foundation, it's one of these rare organizations in the world where they own something like 20 or 25 Stradivarius and Guarneri instruments. And they loan them out to people who apply to the foundation. So this is, instead of just needing word of mouth or somebody coming to your concert, you can literally just send in your bio, your concert listing, some recordings, and if they select you, you get an instrument. I applied to the foundation 10 years ago. They said, congratulations, you've been selected. We have one violin available. When can you come to Tokyo to try it out? And of course, got on the first flight. I tried it out. It was the Engelmann Stradivarius of 1709. And I remember feeling a little ashamed because the first time I played the violin, I thought, I don't know if this is the right one. It wasn't in the proper adjustment. There was something about it that just felt quite difficult for me to understand. Fortunately, after a few visits to the violin doctor, the luthier, a couple adjustments, it became very easy for me to play. COVID came, the foundation recalled all their instruments for safety reasons. I gave the violin back. Once we could go back to Japan, they said, you can have that violin back. You can have your Stradivarius if you wish, or we now have this violin available. So I said, if it's good enough for Isaac Stern, Izai, all these guys, I think it's probably good enough for me. I had the exact opposite experience, where the first time I picked up this instrument, you felt the power, the soul, the history, everything about it was just there. And it's only opened up more so since then.
I just love these stories of these instruments that get passed, and I'm just, I've heard this violin played many times over the years by Isaac Stern. He would be regularly visitor in San Francisco. I'm very good friends with his sons, Michael and David, and I had the good fortune of often staying at Mr. Stern's apartment when I would come down from New York to from New Haven to New York. And so I sort of have this connection with the Stern family, and Mr. Stern used to play this, obviously over the years. So it's just lovely to see it back in the flesh, and to have the chance to hear you play it this week. And if you're very nice, he will play it a little bit this evening before we're done. And maybe that's the opportunity to segue into the music we're going to be playing this week. Maybe we can talk a little bit about how the program came into being, what you're hoping to achieve with it, what your aims are. What's it all about?
Well, I think it started at a dinner party in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it did.
So Alasdair was attending a concert that I had the great fortune of taking part in. It was a kind of embarrassment of riches in terms of violinists playing all four of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, plus four of the Piazzolla Four Seasons that are kind of companion pieces. And it was basically every great violinist you can name on the same stage, and so it felt a little bit like overkill. But Alasdair very fortunately attended. We chatted a little bit afterward, and you mentioned that you had this idea for the Winter Festival and curating, and would I be interested in any form? and of course, I immediately jumped at it. I think I probably spewed like 3 different ideas at you. I'm sure all of them are half cooked and half brained, but fortunately, Alasdair invited me to have a deeper conversation with the team here, and we realized, well, Four Seasons, why not? I mean, this is a wonderful place. The natural surroundings here. I remember from my visit in 2018. I remember laying on the lawn after the concert and just looking up at the stars and being totally in awe. And I took a couple great hikes up Bald Mountain as well. So for me, the nature element had to be kind of first and foremost. And it helps that Vivaldi's Four Seasons are some of the greatest pieces of music ever written. And then from there, I think we were kind of talking about some other ideas. Should we bring in the idea of America's 250th birthday? Should we stay rooted in nature? And we kind of decided let's have both. So I know I think the Copland was the next thing that came on the list, right?
Probably, because at one point we needed to make sure that you weren't just being overworked, because Ben is leading the Vivaldi from the violin. With a small group that we have, you don't need a conductor, so Ben is doing that. But I also thought that you need some time off, because otherwise it's a very intense evening for you. So that's probably where the Copland came in, and it's one of my favorite pieces.
Yeah. Copland, to me, he embodies the American sound. He was a Jewish boy from Brooklyn, but I think that sense of expansiveness and just optimism without being too blunt about it, I think is, to me, distinctly American. This kind of a little bit of reserve, but deep pride and patriotism being there. So the message of the piece, I think, is also very timely. And then from there, what else describes the sound of America? And I had 2 pieces that I knew that I wanted to have kind of bookend the Copland in the first half. One was a piece that was written for me by Gabriella Smith, who is a fast-rising, great American composer. She's based, I believe at the moment, she's based in Seattle, but she mostly grew up in the Bay Area. And she happens to be a composer who is mostly a kind of environmental advocate. All of her music is really rooted in nature. It's about preservation of nature. Everything is about, she has a great cello concerto about Iceland and kind of glaciers and things like this. And this piece is called Sanguinium for solo violin, and it's about these red flowering currant plants that she and her partner planted at a Navy field in outside of San Francisco that they're trying to kind of rehabilitate. And so for her, it's this idea of rebirth. The piece also happens to be kind of closely affiliated with a dear friend of mine who passed away of pancreatic cancer. So this idea of birth, rebirth, finding the next path, I think is a great way to start. So we have that, we have the Copland, and then what else? The Copland ends in a very contemplative, meditative place. And I always believe we should send you guys out into intermission ready for the next thing.
Cocktail.
Yeah, for a cocktail, yeah, exactly. And so who else embodies the American sound? For me, I had been dying to play this piece called Road Movies by John Adams. He's probably the greatest living American composer, in my opinion, right now. And this piece is, as the title was suggested, it's just about a road trip. It's the first movement is, I forget if he describes it this way or if this is just my mind, but it's, imagine you're in the West, you've got a giant expanse. You can see maybe a couple cacti, a couple hay things. In the distance, you're in the right lane of the highway and you're just enjoying yourself a little bit. You're kind of cruising along. The second movement, he just describes as meditative, and it's, I don't know. My image of it is you go to Arches or to Zion National Park, and you're just awed by what you have in front of you. And then the third movement, I think he calls 40% swing, which in his words, I think he composed this on a computer where you can kind of dial up and down the amount of swing that happens in a playback, essentially. And he decided 40% is exactly where he wants it to be. So it's chugging along. It's got that kind of perpetual motion thing like you'd imagine from a road trip, but it's got, the right soundtrack and the right groove going to it.
You mentioned groove because, John's music over the years has taken many different forms, and this is from the 1990s. It just occurred to me, by the way, parenthetically, that roughly speaking, each of these three American works is separated by about 40 years. So you get something from the mid 40s. Appalachian Spring, I think, was 1944, 45. The Adams, actually a little bit later, is like 1994. And then Gabriella Smith from last
23 or 4.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually an interesting snapshot over time-lapse photography, if you want, if you like, of three distinctly American voices. But when in John's case, it seems to me that he's also drawing on American musical vernacular, blues. There's definitely a kind of a jazz element as well. And does that is that a fair assessment?
Spot on, totally spot on. I mean, it's distinctly his own music, but you hear, especially the second movement, it has this kind of bluesy thing. He asks me, or any violinist, to tune down our lowest string a whole step, so it has this, slight twang, but it's the sense of you're deep in the seat, you're feeling it. Yeah, low light.
Yeah. I just lost track of my train of thought. Doesn't matter. So these are three, obviously, distinctly. I know where my train of thought went. Very much 20th or 20th century pieces, and as such, as a performer, you are given a great deal of information. It's not to say that there's even within the Adams there's lots of room for creativity, but I imagine almost every note has some kind of marking or clear direction to do, right? Is that fair?
In all pieces, yeah.
In all pieces, right. The Copeland as well, less so, I think, than the Adams or the Smith. On the other hand, the Vivaldi is by no means that way at all. I thought we could talk a little bit, maybe you can demonstrate, of the amount of choices. If you were to compare a sample page from Road Movies and sample page from Four Seasons, you don't need to be a professional musician or even to read music to see that there's an awful lot more little black dots and marks and scratchings on the Adams than there is in the Vivaldi. And this is, of course, when we go back, the further back in time we go, the less information on the page we have from composers. So I guess my question is, how did you form an interpretive approach to the Vivaldi, and give us some of the ideas that you have?
Well, obviously, the Vivaldi was written centuries ago. We don't know exactly what it sounded like when he envisaged the piece. We know a little bit about his backstory. He was a violin tutor at this Pietà, essentially orphanage. So he had these wonderkind kids that he could teach all these technical things to. So we know that it should be virtuosic. Now, as a string player, you're always faced with the dilemma of, okay, do I go hardcore into trying to really recreating it exactly as Vivaldi would have heard it, using his tuning? We tune our violin at a certain pitch, which is much higher than these instruments were originally designed to play at. And you would hear a difference. It's if the open A is this, the tuning for Vivaldi would be that's the open A essentially for them.
Yeah, half step below.
So there's a very fundamental thing that way. There's also the types of strings. We now use steel strings or synthetic materials. Back in Vivaldi's day, there would be gut strings. They are lower tension. They have a warmer sound, but they are much more fickle, and they have a different quality of sound. And in a bigger auditorium, they're not so great. So you have all these different compromises that you have to decide. Okay, do I go hardcore this way or that way? My big solution, if I may, the other big thing is what type of bow to use. So this is essentially what's called a Baroque bow. As you can see, it's shorter than the other bows that we now use in modern times. It plays differently. It's going to have a thinner sound. It also inherently decays at the very end of the bow. So a modern bow, you see it has this kind of curve at the tip here that gives us power at the tip. The Baroque bow will have a very different gesture. It's a straight thing, but you lose everything here. So you feel great here. You have no power beyond here. So many pieces of information. How do you decipher that? My big thing is Vivaldi was so specific about the weather, the images, the springtime birds, the thunder, the terror, and the evil of cold. Actually, at one point he says, this is, you have to stamp your feet to get the cold out, and there's this very aggressive section. There's teeth chattering, and so my solution is to lean into the kind of text painting through music, I guess. I use contemporary equipment. All of my compatriots on stage are also using old instruments, but with contemporary stuff. And so there's more a sense of, let's not worry about the dialect. It's like watching a period film, and is it important to really know exactly the armor that they wore, or is it more important to convey the emotional journey? And that's my solution.
Yeah, and you'll hear all of that in action. And then, of course, there's a question of dynamics, loud and soft. There's not much written on the paper, right?
No, he has a handful of dynamics. Even those are called into question. There are different editions. We don't know if those were Vivaldi's or just some random editors. So basically, you're given most of the notes. There are discrepancies about which notes, basic tempos, but even those tempos don't always make sense. And it's really kind of a blank canvas for each interpreter to come up with, should we have the harpsichord play a lot? Should we have the harpsichord play very little? Should we have half the section play? Should we have the entire orchestra play? Should we have a 30-person orchestra? Should we have a 6-person orchestra? Whatever,
I'm trying to ask something here that doesn't entirely put you on the spot in an unfair way. So one of the things I've always loved about your playing is your imagination, and your ability to take things off the page. One of the Four Seasons, that legendary now performance in Seattle that I saw Ben do in 22, I think it was, 22, 23, something like that. He played Summer, so I've already heard him play one of the Four Seasons. But it's often a piece that you'll hear. It's been done, like maybe 50,000 different interpretations, many of which you'll hear in an elevator. And I don't wish to denigrate necessarily some fine musicians in the past, but what has happened in the last 50 years or so has been quite an evolution, if not revolution, in the way that we understand the music from this period. Back in, let's say, the 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, or even some of the 60s, everybody would play with a much more romanticized, a thick, soupy sound, tons of vibrato, like back on every single note, and not a whole lot of inflection, not a lot of in the speech pattern. There would be very kind of like a sewing machine, and that's still stuff like you might hear in an elevator or if you've been put on hold. This is not your approach, and I'm wondering, without necessarily showing how not to do it, I wonder if you could give an example of from any of those seasons of how you bring this to life. Give us a little bit of a sneak preview of whether it's articulation, or you can even say, well, in this excerpt, I have this approach, or I used to do it this way. I don't know. Just what do you think?
One thing where I think I depart from other interpretations is in the slow movement of Summer. So this is supposed to be, imagine a farm boy is just lying in the heat. He's exhausted. He's got the flies going around his head. He's trying to swat at them. And off in the distance, he sees the thunder rolling in. He's just exhausted. So you have all these different characters and these ideas. If you played exactly what's on the page from Vivaldi, you would play a very beautiful singing melody, and then the orchestra would have these interjections where the thunder is in your face. You're getting struck immediately. I think Vivaldi marks forte for these things. My image of this is more, let's create all the various sounds. So the gnats and the flies. If you play it literally, yeah, actually, it would sound. That's not a super clear depiction of a gnat. I mean, like everybody knows this idea of it's going into your ear, right? So we use a technique called sul ponticello, where you're playing much closer to the bridge. That is much more depicting of a fly that's in your face. The thunder, if it were played exactly as he marks, it would just be every single time. My vision is much more, we all know what thunder looks like. Sometimes you think I have 30 minutes before the rain is about to drench me, right? Maybe it might be 15, I don't know, but you feel the rumble underneath your feet first. And so I've asked the orchestra to do it in various different ways for each time, but sometimes it's where sometimes not having the clear picture is actually the most terrifying. What else do I do? I mean, I embellish certain lines where if you play only the notes on the page, it's a very beautiful melody. But I think appropriate for that time, and also I just enjoy making stuff up on the spot. I will occasionally embellish little things. It's, to me, it's much more depicting of this farmer or this peasant boy kind of, oh, I remember this cooler time. Yeah, oh, great, nice. Yeah. So the music, I think, holds basically any possibility. There's barking dogs you'll hear in it. You'll hear gunshot. You'll hear a hunting scene, and so it's really kind of up to personal taste of how deeply do you go into this idea. We're not killing any animals on stage, but we're getting close.
And icicles melting, which normally would have been quite apposite at this time of year, but that's long gone, I think, right? But the slow movement of winter is one of the most beautiful textural things that he creates.
Yeah.
With Ben spinning out a beautiful line underneath the violins in the orchestra, playing pizzicato, plucking, which I guess is, I mean, that's the image that I take is of either raindrops or icicles, but is very water related. And so this is, as I say, to go back to the elevator analogy, we're sort of used to have that as music to drive by or to music to go up and down floors in, but it's actually an incredibly sophisticated piece of tone painting. And it's the musician's job, of course, to bring that to life, which you do so beautifully. I'm so excited to hear that.
I feel very lucky that the musicians are willing to go with me on this. I'm sure they've played it dozens, if not hundreds of times, many wonderful ways. And each time you bring something new, it's, you don't know if people are going to accept it and make it their own. And I feel very lucky that I think everyone's really embracing it.
Oh, it's a great team, and you're in for a treat, that's for sure. We have a few minutes left, and maybe that's a good time to turn things over to you. We have a couple of extra mics, and fire away with some questions. So, Jenny, I think we have a volunteer here towards the front.
Tell us about your sister.
She is my best friend, so she continues to be an inspiration. She took up the viola in high school. She had a wonderful career as a professional violist. She went to Juilliard. She was in the Sarasota Orchestra to start with. She was assistant principal in the Utah Symphony. COVID came. She had recently moved with her husband to Cincinnati, intending to apply for the orchestra there. And I think, like many people, kind of took a step back and said, I've accomplished everything that I want to in music. I think it's time for something else. So she now uses her storytelling abilities as she works in marketing for the food industry. So she is a great inspiration that she had the courage to really, truly pivot, honestly.
Fascinating.
Hi. Would you mind talking more about that instrument and how it is cared for as such a high value asset as you travel through the world and how it's kept safe?
Absolutely. Well, there are rules that are imposed on me by the foundation, which are very appropriate. So they insist that you get maintenance done at least once every 3 months, 4 times a year essentially. I go to the luthier sometimes once a month, sometimes every 2 weeks, just to make sure that it's cleaned. Sometimes as I'm traveling, I'm going between different climates. Different humidities will cause the wood to expand and contract, and the glue that's used to secure all the different pieces of wood is very delicate and flexible by design. You want it to be able to vibrate as freely as possible, but that also means that you get open seams, and so you need a specialist to glue that up. So It's a 300-year-old, or almost 300-year-old instrument. I don't know exactly the condition of the wood itself, but it's not uncommon for worms to have taken hold at some point in the instrument's history. I don't think that's the case with this one. I think you can see in this light, this violin probably originally was bright red, like brilliant, brilliant red. And all the varnish, or much of the varnish, has been kind of worn away or scraped off or something. So then there's a kind of very gentle sealing coat that's put on top of it, and you have to make sure that that is maintained as well. The strings, I change every 4 to 6 weeks. I play a lot, and so I find that I need to kind of refresh every 4 to 6 weeks. What else? Oh, another very cumbersome but very useful thing is anytime I cross an international border, I have a passport for this violin. It's called a carnet. So it's basically what you're doing is you're prepaying the duties on the violin. There was an unfortunate situation about 10 years ago where one of the instruments from the foundation was confiscated in Frankfurt because they thought that maybe the violin was being smuggled or something. And so after that, the foundation insisted on these carnets. So I have to go see a customs officer every time I leave the United States, I enter Germany or wherever and return and stuff like that. And then I also have to go back to Japan once a year to renew this passport. So it's a lot, but with an instrument of this incredible value, which in many ways is, priceless, it's worth it.
Is it in a safe?
I probably shouldn't tell you. No, I think the great thing is most people, when they see somebody with a big oblong case on their back, they don't know what it is. They think is that a bow and arrow? Is that a saxophone? When I board a flight, usually the flight attendants or somebody will joke, is that a Stradivarius? And I say, no, it's not. I actually. But I think ignorance and anonymity is the best defense. The insurance on this is fortunately paid for by the foundation, but I believe it's a local insurer in Tokyo. There are some in the United States that also insure instruments. My bows are insured since I own them. But yeah, there are special insurance firms for that.
Got one back here.
Yeah.
Hi, another question about the instrument. I mean, there you were, Stradivarius or that. I mean, I couldn't imagine being in a position like that. Aside from the history of the instrument and the folks who played it and sort of all the cultural aspect of it, what was it about the sound of that instrument that really attracted you?
Of this violin.
Yes.
To be oversimplistic about it, Stradivarius instruments, we all know, can sound like angels singing. But often, from a playing perspective, you're pushed into that way of playing. The violins only really resonate at their fullest if you are quite gentle and delicate and just moving the bow just right with it. This violin I find to be amazing because it allows you to play in any way you want. You can play angelic on this violin. It loves being, played very delicately high up on the E string, but it also really responds quite well to, quite assertive, sometimes aggressive playing on the G string. The sound doesn't buckle. It's in good health. So it really feels like there's kind of no limit to what the violin can do. So psychologically as a player, it feels great to play this violin. And therefore, if you feel great, you can express yourself fully, which I think is the most important thing.
I have one last question. How's fatherhood?
It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and it is also the most wonderful thing in the world. Mr. Felix, he had his first violin lesson at 6 days old, so he's a little behind. He loves watching me practice and hearing me practice. His attention span, we have to work on a little bit, but it's great. He's actually with me here in Sun Valley, so we've been enjoying, some of the playgrounds at the elementary school. We went to, I think it's called Little Park, right here downtown. It's great. I'm lucky when I can bring him with me on these concert trips. I have a long tour in Australia and New Zealand in July, which fortunately I've convinced my wife to take some time off from work so that we can go to Auckland and hike and do all these things. So yeah, it's great. I practice less but better. Yeah.
we look forward to seeing him get bigger and bigger over the successive years as you return in the future to Sun Valley. But in the meantime, just want to thank you so much for sharing your life and your music with us both tonight and this week. I hope you're going to be able to come to one of the concerts, and as you can probably tell, you're in for a treat. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Ben.